Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. I'm Zach Gardner, the chief architect at Keyhole Software, and I have had the privilege of working with some really, really interesting mentors through my career. I've had people that have done everything from change the way that I send my emails to being, very idiosyncratic, to really changing the way that I think about how I approach software development in general. And I felt that it was selfish of me if I didn't try to give back to the community, if I didn't try to interview other people to see what experiences they have had, and to be able to share the conversations that we're having sort of out in the open. Today with me, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, is Tom Hill, aka Hilly, to those that know him well. He's the engineering director of applications at Corsearch. Mr. Hilly, how's it going?
Oh, I'm good, thank you, Zach. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. And of course, all the views and opinions expressed in this program and the views and opinions of the participants do not reflect their employers, any trade organizations, any football clubs they're supporters of. Did I tell you that I'm a West Ham supporter? I can't remember if we talked about that earlier.
No, we haven't spoken about that one yet.
Okay.
It's the wrong shape for me.
That's okay. I think I enjoy perpetual humiliation and defeat. I think as being a West Ham supporter, that's kind of what you have to get used to. Every once in a while, they do well. So, enough of the fun stuff. So talk to the audience for those that, don't follow you on LinkedIn, that, get a chance to see your posts that come out or read about every day with some really good insights. Kind of talk to them about what your career path has been like. Like, how did you get into programming? What were some of the gigs that you've had over the years? And then what do you do now at Corsearch?
Cool. I've definitely had what you would call a squiggly career, I guess. We've alluded to in the past about the guitars that are visible just to the side of me, and there's one also behind me in that corner, along with a substantial number of others. I didn't start in tech. I started as creative, so it overlaps a little bit, but my degree was in something called interactive media production, where we made basically interactive installations. Most of it was around like video and music production, but we built physical installations for things as well. So my final year project, we built an interactive horror house. We had back projected walls, something called Ambisonics, which I won't go into detail, but if you want to find out, you can Google it, which is basically a pinpoint surround system. We smashed our Wii remotes and hid infrared sensors all around the place, and then basically built an escape room where we could make things get creepier. So you had to try and guess the pin pad, and then we back project visuals into your peripheral vision. As you turn to try and look at them, they'd run away from you. It'd have the sound of deep breathing right behind your ear, to try and freak people out and distract them, which is where the overlap programming comes in. But I didn't start down that route. I wanted to be a creative and did the very cliche thing of moving back home with mum and dad and then attempting to make a career as a session musician and a sound engineer. I didn't manage to land a job with a major recording studio, and the very fact we're having this conversation proves that I didn't become famous for music. And doing that, you then make no money, effectively. So I went and looked for an actual job in order to escape the parents' house, having had a sense of freedom at university, and ended up getting a job as a graphic designer. So I was doing traditional graphic design for a business that had an e-commerce presence. So I was doing things like billboards, adverts and magazines, as well as then doing photo editing and things for the website. Eventually, they wanted to rebrand, and also then didn't want to pay an agency to do it when they'd just employed the design guy as they saw me. So basically set me the challenge of then trying to play around with and improve the design of their website, which was the introduction to the world of the web. I was intrigued. I'd obviously done a little bit of programming as a part of my degree, although it was not necessarily proper programming languages. It was more obviously programming for music interfaces and programming for visual light effects. But either way, I gave it a bash, found it intriguing, and went and joined a web design agency. These were the classic at the time churn out as many static websites or as many WordPress websites as we possibly can in a month was basically the objective, um, which sucked all the fun and passion out of development for me. So I ran away and went back to the creatives and joined an IT networking company that was creating a digital marketing arm for their business. So I was there again primarily as a designer, but also obviously because I could do some of the initial web development stuff at the very beginning. A few years down the line, and I find myself basically managing a team of account managers, social media marketers, a few other web developers, and people doing SEO and copywriting. And I realized again, I'd taken a job in a creative area and had now found myself more doing account management and pre-sales and being wheeled out in front of potential customers to talk about things we've done in the past and understand the requirements. So again, kind of realized, well, this isn't what I want to do. It's proved useful later on, and I'll come back to that in a minute. That decided, no, I want to do creative stuff again, and went and joined my first software as a service business as a user experience designer. So doing all the wireframing and speaking to customers about user journeys, user engagement, etc., and trying to build out an interesting experience that solves their problems. Over time, the classic thing that happens in most companies, can you start to do some more high fidelity stuff? So from UX to UX and UI. And then again, eventually, like, we're not building this thing as fast as we'd like. You used to do web development. And you start helping out to build some of the web components as well. They'd chosen to go with React. Very early days of React, it was version 0.14-ish, definitely pre the going to the first major numbers. And it was very different. So that was the introduction to the difference between software engineering and web development, I guess. The challenges were more exciting. It played more into the hands of creativity than I got out of web development. So I enjoyed it. I then just subsequently spent a good chunk of my career then just working my way up from being a front-end software engineer, junior effectively, all the way through to being a front-end software architect. Whilst I was at the company where I was doing the front-end software architecture, one of my managers kindly pointed out to me that the things I tend to spend most of my time doing and the things that I provide most value in weren't necessarily technical things. It was more product understanding, being able to build relationships with customers, building relationships with the wider business, and then subsequently making the teams I was a part of more effective. So rather than me being that classic 10x engineer that comes in and makes the team more effective by just churning everything out, I had the much sought after multiplier effect. And he kindly suggested to me that I should try my hand at management, which is basically what I've done ever since. So I've then just held a number of different managerial and leadership roles across a number of different businesses and sectors until I find myself now as the engineering director for applications at Corsearch. But again, I'll dive into that a little bit. Basically, we're an online brand protection platform. So there's kind of three arms to the business, or three main arms to the business. One is trademark protection, which is fairly easily understandable for most people. Are you infringing on our trademark, or are you trying to register your own trademark, which potentially is too close to ours across various jurisdictions? Online brand protection, which is the area that I work within, which is effectively going around various e-commerce websites, trawling the internet, looking for people that are selling either counterfeit versions of products or unlicensed products for different things. So you can imagine people selling fake car seats, fake versions of handbags, and unauthorized accessories for games consoles. Those types of things that would otherwise infringe upon a company's intellectual property, should we say. And then we have online content protection, which is pretty much the same thing. It spends most of its time on the dark web, looking for people that are selling ripped versions of DVDs, people that have filmed things at the cinema illegally, or like they don't do that as often as they used to. etc., etc. And that's basically the core of the business. Each of those areas is pretty much then divided into one is all about the data and the web crawling, so gathering as many data points as possible, putting that all into one massive data lake. And then the other half, which is the part I do within online browser protection, which is then the web applications. So taking that information, displaying it in a useful way to users who are analysts, right? Predominantly, not always, but they're usually an analyst, who will basically go through this and look for great relationships and links and build out a picture of whether something is potentially fraudulent activity or not. And if it is, they can then choose to enforce against it. Again, depending on the type of infringement or the level of it, or whether it's a repeat offender, will depend on how they choose to take action. But it's quite cool. It's not a space I've really come across until started to work here just over a month ago. But it's definitely interesting. A lot more for me to learn yet, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I mean, as you were talking through the problem space, it actually reminded me of one of my in-laws, one of my wife's aunts. She did almost the same thing for Harley Davidson, except it was all manual. So having a process that goes through, scrapes all that stuff, like that's pretty invaluable. That is definitely solving a real business problem with technology. Those are like my favorite things to do. You know,
Yeah,
that's what gets me up in the morning.
yeah, no, absolutely. I say it's interesting. It
Yeah.
also comes with that kind of sense of social good. Obviously, there are certain products and product categories where you get a feel good factor out of doing it.
Mhm.
Specifically, things like car seats is a very good example. You
Mhm.
don't want to buy an unregulated one that's untested and then, God forbid, end up in some kind of accident with no cover, or because you were unaware that you'd been sold a
Mhm.
counterfeit version of a product.
Oh man, that takes me back for my youngest. We were looking at a new car seat, and my wife had found a deal on the same brand of car seat, the same model, everything. It was like, I don't know, it was like 40 or 50 pounds off. And we are like, yeah, like what? Why would we buy something more if we can go? And so we went through the process. We did checkout. We went through PayPal. And the only thing that alerted us to the fact that it was counterfeit is our receipt from PayPal listed the company that we had just paid, some money to. And it was clearly not the firm that we thought we were working with. So, I mean, kudos definitely. I wrote down, a couple different things to kind of get into our second topic.
Yeah.
You come from a somewhat non-traditional background. I would say you weren't like me. You weren't in the cradle, with your QWERTY keyboard, just like hammering away. And I think that people that come from, a non-traditional background or even like going the design agency route, like you have a different feel for how the tech should work than someone who has been, just like born and bred on, the bits and the bytes. So I'm curious if you could talk to a little bit, like what are some of the interesting things that you have come across? It could either be both, any memorable technical problems, or maybe even some non-technical, maybe like some managerial problems that your skills and your soft skills, so to speak. I think why you get put in front of people a lot is because you have those skills. Just like what are some memorable experiences that you've had throughout your career?
I think the best one that kind of brings the two worlds together was a company I was working at called Globality, which is in a procurement sector. They're building a software as a service product for the procurement industry. Within there, one of the challenges we faced was internationalization. So the product, right through its MVP, had been built entirely on the basis of basically everyone speaking English, predominantly being based in the US. We'd begun to sell to some flagship companies, massive FTSE 100, like global index brands, including some financial businesses. And one of their core requirements is obviously they're multinational companies. And their procurement arm wasn't in the US, it was in South America. So the first thing they said to us is, we love it, great product, can we have it in Spanish? Um, yes, maybe. And I was obviously at this point kind of acting in the capacity of a front end software architect. So that landed then squarely, firmly in my world of we have this UI. The UI was, I would say AI, but it was not really AI. We had machine learning under the hood. The UI was made to look like artificial intelligence. So you'd have what appeared to be a conversation. But really, what happened was you got a series of structured questions, and depending on the answer you provided, it kind of took you down a different set of paths in the questions it would ask. What that meant is our interface was obviously very dynamic. The other problem that we faced, that we soon realized with multinational businesses, is the UI might need to be in one language, hence, maybe as a native speaker, your native language is Spanish. However, they could be procuring a product with a company in Germany, a company in the US, a company in Portugal, a company somewhere else in the world. So we then had to figure out how to split the UI as well in terms of the user interface might be in the native language of the speaker, the project they're working on and the people they're working with might be speaking another language. So we could end up having two languages or more rendered within the UI at once. So technical challenge wise, pretty high. The reason I kind of say it smushes the two worlds together is the way I then went about building it was definitely not starting with the software. The way I started it is, well, who's going to be doing the translations for us? So we then had an internationalization team that was hired in. Obviously, they're non-technical. So how do we make sure that every piece of copy, every piece of text that we want to put into the platform gets translated and into the software without it having to always go through the hands of engineers? That was the clear bottleneck to me, is if we said, product, write the copy in English, they hand it off to an internationalization team, you translate it into however many languages. You can imagine this growing to eventually be potentially hundreds of languages if you include localization of them, and then get that back into the platform. Currently, all of our copy was stored in a JSON file. You can imagine if we multiply that out, it very quickly and very easily gets to the point that things don't work or things have errors. So the design then for me started with, well, how do we push this out? Like, how do we build a technological solution where all of the management, all of the localization, all of the internationalization of copy happens outside of engineering, but we can then easily pull it back in? So what we effectively ended up doing was creating small internal platform, should we say, that linked out to a third-party provider. So again, deliberate kind of hexagonal architecture here. Everything about the internationalization platform was self-contained. So if we wanted to swap from one provider to another, we make changes in one small location. That then fed into what we chose in the end, just because the team were all familiar with it, was a Slack bot. Crazy as that sounds. So we had a Slack bot that people could interact with, where they could choose to add new copy. They could provide the key that we would then use within the software. So product could say whatever dot whatever dot whatever. Type in the text in English that it needs to be. That can then be fed out to the internationalization platform, where the specialists then work in the tool that they're familiar with. That information got fed back to a piece of middleware, which automatically updated the JSON documents, which were hosted in an external S3. And we then created basically an intermediary service, like a bit of middleware, that as you booted up the platform, checked the languages, fetched the various lang files, stored them in cache, obviously make retrieval and the rest of the operations faster, and pulled it in. But what that meant is we had an independent set of deployments for the platform. Engineers only ever used keys. We had some fallbacks in place where if a key didn't exist, it would show certain bits of copy or entirely wrap certain components in some instances and prevent them from being rendered. And then deployment and management of internationalization and localization was elsewhere. But having spoken to a lot of people that have done internationalization since, it seems I went about it a very different way, because the viewpoint for me wasn't solve the technical thing first, it was solve the human thing first. That was the clear bottleneck and constraint that I'd kind of eyed in on based on all of my experience with working with people. which is as good as people are. But we make a lot of mistakes and we're slow and we have other priorities. So I started with the people problem and then worked back to the technical solution.
I dig it. That's awesome. I had never thought of doing something like a Slack bot because that's something that you don't have to build the user interface for to enable the product people to give the new copy. You can hook it into the third party APIs to send it out to that other service. Like that's really interesting. And I think the interesting, at least from an architecture perspective for me too, is the fact that you could have multiple languages that you have to translate to on the same screen at the same time. My one internationalization project was showing the value of a particular brand logo on a TV advertisement or during like a football match. It would be, like the banners that they have kind of around the side. Like, could you
Yeah.
quantify how much like that ad was worth? And it was in dollars, and we had to make it available in pounds, in euro. And the hard part was in the US, we always have the same symbol for currency. It's always the dollar sign. Well, this project was in PHP, and every variable in PHP starts out with the dollar sign. So, like being able to differentiate those. I mean, my internationalization was not nearly as hard. I don't think it's yours, but that's a really interesting. I always like to get other people's perspective on how they would do it. That's really neat.
Yeah. So yeah, that epitomizes it the best, I think, is again, I guess it's why I fell into management is most problems in software ultimately are people problems. And most people problems are communication problems.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing I've kind of learned over my career, especially working in the agency environment. I'd even draw it back to the simplest bug in a bit of software. The bug is probably there because there was a requirement missed. The requirement was probably missed because either there was a handover or there wasn't a contextual conversation early enough on, or people didn't outline exactly their expectations when they communicated. And they both think, yeah, we understood each other, we've got this bang on. One person expects one thing, the other person expects another. It's that classic scenario, isn't it? How do you know if we all see in the same color? If I point to a color and ask you, is that blue? We all say yes, but that doesn't mean you see it the same way I did. So every problem normally boils back to people in communication. If you any problem you're solving, if you start there, where are there going to be the problems with communication with this thing? Especially building large bits like an internationalization platform for a company. Look at that. Where are the handovers? Where are the exchanges of information? How do we make that quick and easy? You'll probably find the technical solution you have to build at the end is much simpler than it would have been if it started at the bottom with how do we do this technique.
Mm-hmm. So that is a excellent A+ transition. You should go into podcasting to my third question is your bias, I think, is definitely towards communication. And like that lends itself really well to someone that goes into management and is successful. For people that are mid to senior level software engineers that are thinking about getting into management, what are some of the tips? What are some of the tricks? What are the things that you wish you would have known going into this that might have made it easier, that maybe we can help the next group of managers to have just a little bit smoother of a journey than we've had?
The initial transition from being a senior IC or even a mid-level IC into people management, the most difficult thing to let go of is wanting to solve the problem in a hands-on way. It's the classic difference between a mentor and a coach, although I don't necessarily think there's a hard line there, some people say, but one is all about asking questions. You imagine a swimming coach. You can't jump in the pool and swim for someone and expect them to watch you and get it. Like you have to change how you do things, and mentoring is more you can show somebody. It's like teaching somebody some woodwork. You show them what to do, and then you stand there and watch them as they do it, and they either got it right or they got it wrong. Software is more akin to the swimming scenario than it is to the traditional craftsman scenario. You can't just show somebody something and expect them to understand it because it's not never the same twice. It's not like woodwork in that regards. Like you don't learn to cut a 45-degree angle and then it changes on you 2 weeks later because the saw has changed. But that does happen in tech. So again, it's that learning to let go and like ask questions to guide people towards an answer is that first step. Once you've got into management and you kind of want to scale your impact and head towards the more senior leadership and senior management roles, it's business and sales, which is where I alluded to earlier that kind of, although I didn't enjoy it at the time, doing the account management, sitting in front of the customers, having those conversations and understanding their business problem and what they're trying to do and what issues they're facing in a market, if it's insurance and there's a downturn or they're trying to target a different age bracket because there's been changes in regulations. Like, no one teaches you that as a software engineer. No one teaches you that as a first layer manager. Once you start to become a more senior executive, a lot of the problems you face and a lot of the people you work with aren't technologists. They have a business problem. They want the business to make more money. They want the margin to increase. They're looking to go to a funding round, so they're concerned about their EBITDA. I can never say that word properly, but again, basically all the different areas that make up the cost profile of a company and how much money it does make and how much money it can potentially make. And the next point after that is selling. It's understanding, how do I sell the technology? How do I sell the technical solution to this business problem in a way that people understand? Because that's where your leverage and influence comes back. You're going to have a much easier time if you can turn around to your CFO and tell them in a dollar amount or a pound amount how much it will cost to build a particular feature and how many customers have been requesting this thing, so what the potential ROI is. Then much easier to go and ask for the money to hire a team than to just say, we've run out of people and we want to build this thing. And the first question I ask you is, well, what's the return on investment? And unless you understand that cost profile and the fact that the business is only really concerned with how is it going to stay alive, how is it going to make money, because you might hate it, but that's why businesses exist at the end of the day, you're going to struggle to scale up past being a manager. It doesn't matter how good you are with people. You could be the most fantastic people manager, have teams that are very, very loyal to you. As soon as you start to abstract away from the coalface and the direct management ICs, you're going to have a hard time making impact if you don't understand the business and you don't know how to sell effectively.
I like it. I mean, that's a pretty good answer for, I mean, anyone that wants to sort of advance in their career in software. If you don't actually understand the domain that you're working in, if you don't understand how your output is going to turn into someone else's input to then make the organization money, I mean, you might as well not even load up that IDE every morning because you're not going to be producing the right code. So, yeah. Any closing thoughts? Any other recommendations that you have? Anything else that we haven't talked about but we should have?
Ooh, interesting question.
What's your favorite guitar? Maybe I'll start with that.
Well, that one's a loaded question, isn't it? Really. I own mostly Stratocasters. My favorite guitar is a purely sentimental reason, which is my Fender Telecaster Standard, because that was the guitar that my parents bought me before my first like major gig.
Awesome.
Which was obviously a pretty cool surprise to get. Favorite brand though is definitely PRX. I have a very big soft spot for the Paul Reed Smith guitar. I have two of them. I only have the SE models because I don't want to invest several thousand in one of the mid models when I know ultimately what I really want is one of the top 10 custom models, which are even more money. So maybe if I manage to eventually build that $1 billion app idea, I might be able to afford to buy myself a few. But in the interim, I'll be sensible. I'll try to be. I do only 11 of them in total, so I'm not that sensible. No, in terms of covering off tech stuff, like that's basically really it. Most of it comes down to coaching and understanding, like you say, the domain of the business and the financial side of it. That's how you're ultimately gonna scale it. People always come first, really, whether you're having to sell to them or understand them. That's all management is about.
Yeah, it's always people. It's always has been.
Yes.
Well, Hilly, thank you very much for the program. I'm glad we were able to finally connect on this. It's always a blast to get to chat with you. And those that want to find out more about him, check out his LinkedIn. He has good advice that comes out very very regularly. So Hilly, it's been a trip, dude. Thanks very
Been a
much.
pleasure.
And
Speak to you
ladies and
soon. Back.
yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you in the future.